Triad Chair for the Disruption and Innovation Group within Tech Titans. I've had the honor of leading that practice for the last 2+ years, and will continue to do so as we move forward. And so if anybody wants to be a part of that process or that body that is working on helping to support Tech Titans' mission around leveraging new technologies to drive disruption and innovation, please contact me at my email address that's here. Additionally, if you have additional questions regarding today's presentation, Bill and I have both provided our emails for you to be able to leverage. So what is Tech Titans? For those that may not be familiar, Tech Titans is an industry association in North Texas that is supporting a broad range of employers as well as member companies and individuals across North Texas. It was founded, as you see, in 1994, and really it is intended to help grow and drive one of the largest technology centers, not only in the US, but ultimately in the world. Founded as part of the telecom and software development and IT services and semiconductors in North Texas, it has continued to expand to include not only technology companies, but as we all know, all of us today are technology companies that simply deliver different products and services, whether that's hardware or software or telecommunications, or it might be retail, furniture, transportation, etc. I think we all recognize that many of us are technology companies that do something, and that something could be dependent, but we're all technology companies at heart. We always want to thank our platinum sponsors, the folks that help make this possible: State Farm, AT&T, Fujitsu, Axis, Ericsson, Cisco, UTD, Dallas, and Texas Instruments, just to name a few of the supporting companies that help make the Tech Titans program successful. Some of the pillars of Tech Titans, so that everyone is aware of what we're trying to accomplish within this group, is education and network. It really is about events. And if you haven't had a chance to reach out and become engaged and find out how Tech Titans can help support not only you personally, professionally, but also your organization, I encourage you to understand that we're here to serve as people to share best practices, lessons learned, technology trends within the innovation group, and help to connect the community so that we all can be successful. Talent, obviously, talent is the lifeblood of every organization. That talent is also from STEM development and workforce development, but also retooling and making sure that you have the right skills and competencies as you move forward. That's one of the focuses that my colleague Bill has in organizational morphology. You may think what that is, but thinking about those future state skills that are going to come from disruptions such as COVID-19. Legislation, obviously, a lot of the way we respond to technology is driven by the regulatory framework. And so the advocacy for the innovation function that we want to have, understanding where we need some help in terms of programs or supplemental. And now it takes a critical component as we look at several of the CARES programs, PPP programs, et cetera, that can help small businesses and large businesses alike really weather the storm that's in front of us right now. We want to recognize and provide rewards and understanding those that are pushing the envelope, not only in terms of technology innovation, but how do we support our community and our brothers and sisters that are our neighbors in our world around us. And so it really is a rich collection of servants that are there to provide not only value to their organizations, but most importantly, to set the conditions for us to ultimately be a better workforce, a better region, and to build upon the culture and values that each of us share. And finally, innovation. We want to make sure that we grow the network, the ecosystem, if you will, around North Texas to really allow it to shape and grow. And I think I and many others within Tech Titans share this vision of North Texas becoming the epicenter for innovation and emerging technology, not only in terms of the developments of these technologies, but for organizations to leverage these technologies to gain not only competitive advantage in the marketplace, but to work and build towards a better society and a better future. In terms of some of the things that we're doing to inspire new ideas, there's a support for university research, conducting some of the academic research with industry, entrepreneurs, and venture capital. I think we all recognize that there's this concept of spin out from the universities, and how do we have the programs, the systems, and the interest within the North Texas community to leverage what academia is creating, to really leverage that and advance that rapidly within the markets that we share. Reverse Pitch Day, this is where entrepreneurs get to hear the needs of business organizations. This could be something that you may want to take advantage of. And then one of our newest programs that continually is to grow is the Innovation Collider. These are a set of services to enterprises that will include executive education around responding to disruption, leveraging new technologies, being able to look at curated tech scouting in terms of matchmaking, and making sure that we have a good handle on the grand challenges that we are trying to address. And today, COVID-19 response is obviously one of those grand challenges. Last, just want to give you a preview of some of the upcoming events that we have that you might want to take advantage of. On April 16th, Moving Freight in the Time of Crisis. I think we all can give a round of applause for those truck drivers and those warehouse workers that are just making sure we have proper toilet paper, that we have food within our grocery stores, the grocery stores that have been doing a tremendous job of keeping a safe environment and an effective environment to be able to make sure that COVID-19 isn't the only crisis that we're facing. On April 22nd, easing the risk of business recovery, we know that there's going to be a new normal. We're going to talk about the concept of a ripple. Some organizations are being affected slightly by COVID-19. Their business is actually booming. There's growth, but those are few and far between. Other organizations, their ripple is actually a tsunami, and it's actually destroying potential markets and opportunities. And so it really is incumbent upon organizations to figure out, how do we recover? And we're going to talk a little bit about that recovery process today with understanding fit for work. Analytics and Insight Forums is going to talk about data privacy, which is going to be a key component of what we're going to talk about today. Concept of track and trace has been something that continues to grow both overseas as well as in the United States. And so how does that continue to manifest itself as we have to balance the privacy of individuals with the need to understand who's been infected by COVID-19 and ultimately who they come in contact with, so that we can in fact recover from the business and health risks that we're experiencing today. And then finally, we can't forget that the world is not stopped. That means that there is still obviously national security issues, there's issues associated with weather-related events, and there's going to be other technology issues that are going to continue to advance during this time. And so though we're in emergency response mode, it is important that we're looking at AI and quantum computing as a mechanism to really perhaps leverage some of the potential implications that we are facing right now. And also, just as importantly, be aware of some of the technology changes that are going to be advancing. So that's our schedule, and you can see it's a pretty rich schedule. Again, as a public service announcement, if there are additional topics that you would like to cover as part of this, or topics that you would like to see Tech Titans to produce, we invite you to send us an email and find out what kind of issues we can help you to address as we continue to move forward. Just as a reminder before we get into the main part of today's conversation, that we'll be using the question and answer panel. So as we go through today, if in fact there are issues or questions that you'd like to ask, we will take those in the course of the presentation, as well as we will provide our email address as we continue to move forward. Like all presentations, the speaker sometimes needs some water. So today we're going to be talking about, as you know, the emerging trends determine fitness for work. And as we get into this presentation, I think it's important that we kind of explain our point of view. We're not just a company that is going to be looking at emerging trends. What we're going to be covering today are actually the proof of concepts, the investments of innovation budget, and the direction that many of our clients are in fact pursuing as part of COVID-19 kind of response, as well as being able to leverage and adapt to the new reality of this. So as we go through this and we share some of the things that we're experiencing today as a company, just understand it's a reflection of what the industry trends are, not just from a research perspective or an inquiry perspective, but from most importantly, a perspective of investment and action on these insights to understand how they can be moved forward. I think it's also important that as we start today, that we recognize is that, like I said before, this is a ripple effect. There's not just one effect that's going to come from here. There are going to be many effects, and understanding the implications in terms of the amplitude of that effect, as well as the impact of that effect, is going to be important for every organization. Many organizations are in kind of a recovery mode or emergency response mode for simply how they're going to move forward. Others are trying to figure out how they're going to make ends meet in the next 2 weeks. They're going to maintain payroll. They're going to be able to pay their rent. Their businesses have been fundamentally impacted to the point of they may not be able to recover. Others are actually growing. And we all know that we're in different places. And so for each individual organization, it's a question of how do you respond to this incident, this inflection point in our society, to understand how you can adapt to survive and adapt to thrive. Some of the key assumptions that we're making that will be foundational to understanding these kind of recommendations and activities that our clients are currently pursuing is that infectious diseases are emerging roughly every 4 years. If you look at SARS, bird flu, swine flu, MERS, et cetera, they've been progressing at a collective rate. Some have obviously created severe disruptions, some have been minor disruptions, and today we have a major transformational disruption that is in front of us. COVID-19, honestly, will likely to have between 2 and 5 waves. If you look at Spanish flu from 1918, there were 3 significant waves of Spanish flu. We know that it spread much faster and globally, given the network of transportation and human movement that we have in today's society. But we also know that there are going to be mitigation steps that are going to be put into place that are going to help mitigate the impact of these waves. And I think it's also important that extreme social distancing, I don't want to discount the benefits of social distancing, nor am I saying that social distancing is not critically important to mitigating the risk from COVID-19. But at the same time, it is going to create economic disaster. And I think that's one of the things that we're trying to balance as a society, not only in the United States, but globally, is how do we maintain the risks, how do we mitigate the risk, while at the same time being able to support some level of economic growth or economic activities that will kind of mitigate some of the potential risks that we have. And finally, I think one of the things that's beginning to emerge from this process is that health and wellness are national security related issues. So there's going to be some immediate impacts that we've already seen within our society. The first one of these is going to be that we've all moved to remote work. This is not a surprise to anybody. The second is that telehealth has changed dramatically over the last several weeks with changes of regulations, both at the state as well as the national level, reimbursement potential activities as well. And so from that point, we're seeing that there's a growth in telehealth. Remote learning is in fact critical right now. As you probably heard, I have a printer going off in my office. If you didn't, there's a printer going off in my office. This is because my children who are in grade school are printing off their work assignments as they sit around the dining room table. They've all had to learn how to leverage not only distance learning or asynchronous collaboration tools, but we've also seen Dallas ISD having to invest over $50 million to provide mobile access points and connections. And so the digital divide, if you will, between those students and families that have access to information technology and those are being acutely discovered. And obviously it's becoming glaringly obvious about those that have access to remote learning capabilities and those that not. And finally, electronic fulfillment and commerce. Less than 10% of grocery opportunities were electronic fulfillment, and now we've changed that dramatically. On the telehealth side, some published studies have come out already that as one hospital chain saw 1,000 telehealth interactions over 12 months, in 2 weeks they had over 30,000. And so that's a significant change as we move forward, is that telehealth hopefully will continue to be something that is prevalent and that is leveraged as we move forward as well. And finally, what are those emerging ripples that are there? So we see that there's beginning the discussions of what we call mass biosurveillance. Just as TSA and other types of security apparatus were put into place after September 11th, that is a possible analogy that you may use to communicate this internally. We're going to see comparable things in place in the United States and others. Back to that key assumption that the extreme social distancing will have an implication on the economy, and how do we mitigate that risk while still protecting our citizens and people within this country. Business model transformation, that should not surprise anyone. We're going to see that on an individual and a collective level, where organizations are going to figure out what is the impact to my products and service, not just how I characterize or market my products and services, in the COVID-19 world. But do I have to fundamentally change the products and services that I'm currently delivering in the marketplace? Fingers crossed that we do have a healthcare revolution. I think we've all been waiting and wanting for telehealth to be something that we can leverage. I mean, as a parent with small children, my wife and I have wasted a lot of hours trying to go to the ENT to make sure that, yep, in 5 minutes there's an ear infection. There are solutions today that will do that from the comfort of your own home and in real time through telehealth. We hope that this is something that continues. And we do believe that pervasive automation will continue to advance, and that's automation of both soft skills as well as manufacturing. I think it's important to realize that transportation, manufacturing has continued in many cases because of a high degree of automation. There's a reason that toilet paper continues to be manufactured on a grand scale, and that's because there's a degree of automation within that manufacturing process. And that will continue to happen as we look at how do we mitigate the risks associated with a health issue and crisis such as COVID-19. Okay. I don't see that we have any questions. As a reminder, you can use the Q&A factor as we continue to move through today's presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Bill Link, who will cover the evolving employer-employee relationship. Bill.
Thanks, Ty. I appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Just as a side comment, the presentation today is being recorded, and it will be available on the Tech Titans website afterwards. So let's take a little closer look at evolving fitness for work requirements. So most of us are aware that job descriptions do tend to contain information about the job that relate to one's physical ability to meet the requirements. So some of the typical ones are, lift and load, must be able to lift 25 pounds. There are others that relate to an assessment of the workload or the hours that typically will be spent. And in addition, there are positions and job descriptions, of course, that require vaccinations, especially if you're going to travel to foreign destinations. I recall going to China a couple of years ago on business, and in Africa especially, in the Africa situation, I think there were 10 different vaccinations that I had to have, and a yellow fever card that was critical at the point of entry in their customs organization. So drug screening, of course, very frequent today. And other things, including drug and alcohol and tobacco restrictions, labor relations rules, and dispute resolutions. What we're seeing now that is a little different is the temperature taking trend, which is going on as a result of the pandemic. So as we move into the next slide, what I'd like to do is take a little closer examination of these tests, fitness for work tests, as they have evolved as a result of COVID-19. One of the most important considerations here is the ADA. And the Americans with Disabilities Act does permit employers to test people for fitness for work. And the ADA's test for employer administered fitness type medical examinations involves several points. So I've laid those out for you down there. Is the employer seeking medical information about physical and mental abilities or impairments? Does the test measure one's ability to perform or one's response to performing, and so forth and so on? One of the kickers here in the temperature taking trend that is going on is, does a healthcare professional interpret the results of the test? Typically, it is an employee or a third party that is not a medical provider that is interpreting the infrared temperature testing going on now. In the case of this pandemic and others before, a couple of critical points here. The ADA really doesn't define what a medical examination is, but in light of the recent crisis, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has provided guidance that temperature testing is permissible, and in doing so, they're following the advice of the CDC. I've already encountered through my network and through an examination of some blogs written by attorneys that there will be challenges to the temperature testing. We can imagine some scenarios. First of all, the infrared temperature devices are notoriously inaccurate. That is one problem. Another is that the courts really haven't ruled on this. So even though the EEOC may say it's okay, it's far from clear that the courts will validate infrared testing. So that remains to be seen. And then there are some considerations, of course, that come to us from HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. The Secretary of HHS, Azar, has put into place temporary waivers of some of the provisions of HIPAA, as you may know, and that is within his authority to do that. But as these things continue, and as Ty noted, that we can expect waves of these serious illnesses about every 4 years, that begs some questions, namely, will thermal imaging of people in public continue after the pandemic as sort of an alert mechanism, if you will, an advanced alert mechanism for new viruses that come? How will the accuracy of the scanning equipment be established? So, critical question. How will people react to crowd scanning if we get to that point? How will the courts respond to that? What about mandatory vaccinations and treatments? Will they be required in the public interest for pandemics? Other considerations may involve immunity passports for international travel, which would be a step up from those vaccinations that are required for certain countries and might have wider applicability. And then there probably will be some new regulations for cleaning and sterilizing hotel rooms and cruise ships, public restrooms, airplanes, and all of that. So these are, I think, critical questions that will have to be settled, and if not through legislation, then likely through litigation. Okay, next we want to turn the presentation over to Ty, who's going to discuss in more detail some of the emerging technology solutions that are in play right now and what we might expect down the road.
Thank you, Bill. And I think, again, let's just focus that at the end of the day, there are going to be court challenges. In fact, there are currently several court challenges that are progressing. Several students, just as you know, in terms of recent news, there's been challenges in the courts to some of the quarantine provisions associated with state governors. There are currently lawsuits that are progressing around institutions that are continuing to charge high fees for in-person students at the university level. There was a class action lawsuit, and of course, there's the class action lawsuit that's forming against China as a country for their way of handling this as well. This will not only be the only litigation that in fact happens. And so as we think about this, we're going to have a multifaceted or multivariable approach to looking at how the disruption is going to be impacted. There is the COVID-19, which is obviously providing the impetus for this, but there's going to be obviously reactions to that. Those reactions could be regulatory, that could be solutions, that could be approaches. And then this will evolve as we have legal challenges to some of these claims moving forward. And so today is really about understanding there's more questions than there's answers, quite honestly, as we continue to work with our clients on testing some of these solutions and understanding the quote near-term applications as well as the medium and long-term implications that they need to be prepared for. We're looking at how do we manage those risk criteria as best we can, and most importantly, establishing a sensing function that can understand not only the technology changes, but the legal precedents that are being established, the regulatory changes. Telehealth, as an example, is changing almost on a daily basis. Many things are evolving very quickly. And so one of the functions that Tech Titans is attempting to serve as a clearinghouse for information around that. And so that is one resource that you can leverage. And of course, all of us, to include my company as a whole, is trying to put their ear to the ground to understand what is emerging in this space as well. And this includes these technology solutions, which again, we played on. Identification and password is something that we all carry as employees, if you will, to get access to a building, identification, a password to get access to a system or a potential set of products or services. And now are we including temperature or tip as part of this kind of workflow as well? As we kind of move into the back half of the presentation, I do want to see if there's any questions that could be formulated as we move forward, and we'll be able to answer those at the end. So Bill talked a lot about infrared scanning technologies, and this is just four. There are anybody who's got an infrared camera and kind of a platform, if you will, to analyze that as well. We're starting to see these being deployed in part of specific areas where employees and workers are being required to come in on a continuous basis. And so that's going to be critical as we move forward, is in fact that there are locations like warehousing, shipping, trucking, manufacturing, receiving, and in the government side, maybe some specialized security models that require people to ultimately be on site and to be able to leverage what they're in fact doing in terms of being on site. And so as an example, one of our clients who currently is in the government space was still having people come in to operate out of a SCIF, secure compartmentalized information facility. And in that SCIF model, people are not doing remote work. And so they have to have people come in. And their challenge was around specifically, how do I monitor employees' temperatures as an indication of detecting elevated body temperature? And so that was a huge issue that they were trying to do. And they were asking the security guards to, in fact, take temperature, even with the standoff of a simple infrared thermometer. It was a challenge for them to be able to do that. And so they are looking at solutions that will be able to scan up to 15, 16 people at a time coming into this facility, and ultimately integrating into its badging infrastructure to allow access to the facilities. So you can imagine solutions such as Care AI, Seek Thermal, FLIR, InVid Tech as well. All these solutions are attempting to use infrared cameras and technology to be able to subsequently put that into place and be able to move forward. And so that is going to be one of the key things that they're going to continue to be able to do. Okay, so I think it's also important to understand that one of the considerations that we have here is the fact that an elevated body temperature is not an indication, is just an indication that somebody is now have a fever. That doesn't mean that they can be asymptomatic in terms of the 14-day incubation period and others. And so this is basically kind of the last line of defense, if you will, for a very sick employee with flu or other COVID-19 related issues. It just doesn't have to be that as a last stop gap for someone with a fever entering into a location, or in a hospital situation or some sort of clinic situation. This is a mechanism to perhaps sort or triage people that have elevated fevers versus others. But I just want to make sure there's a disclosure here that, again, this is a stopgap solution. This is for a high risk type of operation and environment that is going to be required for this as well. And so that is something that we are going to have to make sure we consider, that as you move forward and think about the infrastructure that's going to be put in for these particular environments, understand that there are limitations to this as well. Now, in terms of what we're seeing moving forward, there are discussions about how thermal cameras get integrated into other solutions. And this isn't just here, but as we get into the next, is do I now have to scan myself when I get into a car with a thermal camera? Does that allow my car to operate? Unfortunately, there's DUI solutions that are out there today that you have to actually do a breathalyzer test in order to operate your car. Now, that's an extreme use case, but I don't think any of the use cases should be off of the table at this point. That is kind of the classic divergent convergent thinking process of looking at analysis of alternatives, is not to limit yourself in terms of the potential solution. These are solutions that are out there today. I want to point out on the bottom, Seek Thermal, many of them use a background marker as a way to benchmark or measure the temperature that they're reading off of the face of the individual. And FLIR on the bottom right side has a clear disclosure about the type of cameras and the limitations of these cameras. And these are FDA certified cameras that can be utilized for temperature taking. And this one uses the actual tear duct, the inside part of your eye, as needing to be in the frame. So again, solutions such as glasses, face shields, and other things may actually preclude or eliminate what you can see as part of this process. The next set of solutions get into this concept of wellness reporting, not reporting that you're sick, but reporting that you're well. And again, is this a mechanism which is equivalent to the track and trace component? You see that Valedic, hopefully I said that correct, is using this type of survey tool to say, do you in fact have any COVID-19 related symptoms? And reporting on yourself that you are well enough to go into work. These are solutions that we have as well. Tidal Care just received another $50 million of funding to continue to expand their in-home medical testing. You can get those through Best Buy and certain providers. Tidal Care is a medical grade appliance that can be done in the home to detect, that's a throat depressor, look at your ears, your throat, as a stethoscope on it as well, and you can exercise a telehealth type of operation as well. Do I need to certify that I've done, quote, a wellness exam before I go to a football game? Do I have to do a wellness exam in order to leave the house? Do I look at my risk profile, and based on my risk profile, I have some sort of sampling requirement in order for me to do certain things? Now, that may seem a little implausible, but how much of our own personal information have we given away for trusted traveler programs? That's a frame of reference that I think we should all have as we continue to look at this. Biointelligence is another one that is very interesting from our point of view, in that this gets into the disposable sensor kind of market. This has enough information that it can detect where you adhere it to your body, and gives you over 30 days of information related to that as well. So back to telehealth, as well as the intersection of the advances in telehealth with, in fact, COVID-19. This includes in-home testing, which has gone through its fits and starts, Everwell, and these other in-home COVID-19 testing. So the question is, for schools, for large gatherings, for churches, synagogues, mosques, etc., will we get to a point, or sporting events, that we have to certify ourselves before we go into those types of facilities? I mean, we have to have clear bags today to go into any football game. Do we have to have something else? This concept of a vaccination passport or an immunity passport has been discussed as well. This gets into the track and trace technologies that are being deployed on a regular basis. This will be subject to constitutional challenges pretty much in the United States, maybe not in other places, but it's already lining up. Both constitutional scholars are beginning to look at the potential implications to try to shape that so that, in fact, we don't have that as well. We have tests right now of Aura, which is the ring in the bottom part of that. Part of that is that measures temperature. That's a wearable that measures temperature and other types of signatures, as well as Fitbit and Apple, though those two particular platforms do not have a thermometer capability. They do detect blood pressure, and blood pressure can be a proxy to the body's response to COVID-19. These are all things that are being analyzed and going through the standard longitudinal analysis for efficacy and impact to understand, but there is a recognition that the wearable technologies that are out there today may have an application to this as well. And finally, voice analysis. The Israeli Defense Department has sponsored a piece of work to use voice as a potential mechanism for determining whether or not someone has COVID-19. As a respiratory illness, obviously you may sound different, and we know that there are very slight modifications, and if with enough data, which everyone's trying to get to enough data at this point for several points of view and several different initiatives, voice analysis may be here. So the point of this is that wellness reporting is really at the intersection of COVID-19, being able to return from work, and ultimately the advances that had been happening in telehealth and will continue to happen in telehealth as we continue to move forward. And so these things are going to be really progressing at a pretty rapid rate. Again, from a telehealth perspective, what's going to be the driver of this? Well, the driver of this is the fact that we've had the number of increases from 1,000 telehealth at the end of the day to finally over 30,000 in 2 weeks. There's a question about how soon do you think these will start being adopted and used? They're being used today. This is not technology that is not being used today. There are hospital systems, you can look at the announcements as an example from TytoCare and others, where these are being deployed within hospital systems. You can buy these at Best Buy. From a recent discussion with TytoCare, I believe that TytoCare has exceeded the sales on Best Buy than the Black Friday sales. And I think they're in the top 5 in terms of selling items on Best Buy currently. So these are here today. Biointelligence, as an example, is something that's coming. Voice is coming. These are things that are being, Voice is early stages. Biosense is FDA approved and is going to be doing clinical trials to make sure, again, it's a medical grade sensor. That's critical. Medical grade is an important kind of dimension that has to be involved as part of this as well. Some of the other fitness components, there's a lot of research and a lot of data that's happening right now just to try to get a handle on how do we restart the economy? How do we get people back to work in a safe and orderly manner? And how do we manage risk populations? And that risk population is not only determine what risk factors do I have in terms of morbidity, age, other types of characteristics. Some of those episodic conditions, chronic condition, episodic issues and chronic conditions, medical professionals know today. But as you're in that kind of middle group, and you may have maybe on blood pressure medication, you may be pre-diabetic, you may have other types of issues. I believe the standard now is 2 comorbidity issues. If you're under the age of 60, I believe, I have to go back and validate that, then you can in fact be part of this. So based on your risk profile, there may be different requirements. But again, part of the challenge with this entire model is who collects the data? How private is that data? What can they do with that data? Are they using that data for, ethical and, obviously, hopefully beneficial reasons, or are they leveraging that data to sell it to third parties without your knowledge and consent? Are they using it to, do things that are perhaps worse, as we've seen with the FISA courts and other types of issues that have come out of, again, September 11th is a good proxy to think about some of these issues. But these things are being leveraged today. And again, we're going to see this continue to move forward. I do want to highlight that we believe this is going to be different than Ebola. And we bring up Ebola for a very specific reason. Ebola saw a tremendous focus globally on trying to, really handle that, really terrible disease and infection. But then when Ebola became something that was under control, what we saw was the investment went away. I think that this, in our opinion, COVID-19, I think many of you probably share this, COVID-19 has shocked the global world in terms of doing something different. I think, again, as we're in this kind of journey to be able to limit the infectious rate of spread, as well as also think about how do we balance health and wellness of the society with the economic dimensions that we have to do. This is going to be something that's going to be with us for at least 12 months at the best, likely 18 to 24 months based on vaccinations and others as well. Okay, so there are wellness reporting tools that are out there today. Some organizations are already using these. Some organizations are clearly using some sort of infrared camera capability. But the larger question is, how would you implement this from an HR perspective within your organization? Should you be actually looking at these tools to implement them as part of either your self-funded healthcare plan, or perhaps your requirement to work, because some of these wellness reporting capabilities will be part of the equation for people coming back to work, which may be announced in the next 2 to 4 weeks. And so do you have a plan to integrate some of these risk mitigation controls through wellness reporting that might be able to get your organization back and running? The larger society question of, can I go to a football game? Can I go to, kids going to school? That's going to wait to the fall in all likelihood. But how do we get people back into the business to operate? Wellness reporting will be part of the equation. So what's kind of the post-pandemic response and thought that you need to have right now? And when I say post, what that really means is for each organization, you're going to go through this process of understanding you're in emergency response, you're kind of then assessing the situation, and now you're going to be adapting to the new normal. Organizations are going to flow through that at different levels. That's why we talk about this ripple effect and how do you adapt to survive and then adapt to thrive. In this post-emergency response to the pandemic, here's some considerations to understand. Is just, you got to accept the fact that the employee-employee relationship is going to evolve in unexpected ways over the next 24 months. There are several kind of forcing functions that are changing this. And so there's not a clear crystal ball that says this is what's going to happen at the end of this pandemic. But we know that you're going to have to sense and respond, if you're familiar with the Kaizen model, in terms of responding to chaotic events. We're in the middle of chaos right now, or complex events. These are things that you're going to have to be able to leverage. There's going to be a balance between identifying opportunities to protect health and wellness of employees and maintain their operations and contribute to the community and stability. If you haven't made a run on Smithfield Pork, please don't do it. But Smithfield has closed one of their factories because of the number of COVID-19 cases there, and therefore they're shuttering operations for pork processing. Our food security is the only thing that, in my opinion and others' opinions, are preventing us from this being a very dangerous situation, even more dangerous than COVID-19. If we have discord, we have food shortages, then obviously community dynamics change fundamentally when you have those types of risk versus let's stay in our homes, under our roofs, food's on the table. We have those opportunities as well. It's critically important under the auspices of evaluating employee health is that you really think about how do we monitor our environment. We monitor today for viruses, electronic viruses. Now we have to monitor to a degree, and we have to think about this and balance this in a way that allows for our employees to be protected and well, because that's going to be critical. That may be as simple as thinking through remote work capabilities and not necessarily going back to the office if you can maintain your operations. Communication is going to be key. All of us gotten way too many COVID-19 emails from brands that we know, but as the situation changes, what is your communication, understanding your culture of change that you're going to have within your organization? You're going to have to really communicate well with your purpose, intent, and impact of health monitoring. People are going to be both thankful to come back to the office and to work and get back to some normalcy, but then are going to naturally have questions about what is going on as well. And we covered the monitoring of changes also. I think it's critical that if you don't understand this, there's a question of understanding it and then taking action on it. So we all understand that COVID-19 is a global infection point that's going to influence our society, and therefore, by definition, how we buy products, how we engage with our government, and ultimately industry is going to adapt as well. And so you really have to apply the emerging regulatory framework and evolving customer behaviors to think about your products and services. One tool you can use in this is around scenario planning. This allows for you to evaluate the implications associated with multiple variables, a multivariate approach, to understand the intersection between these regulatory framework, technology, society, business, etc. That is a great tool that those that are in the position to start thinking about these implications need to start leveraging today as part of your next steps. You also need to understand that this is going to create more disruption than other inflection points that we have. Not the only disruption, but it's going to create more disruption than we currently see, because it's going to accelerate some things that we've done effectively as a society. It's going to reduce some other businesses that may never recover from this. I don't want to postulate about what's going to happen to air travel or big tech conferences in the future, but those may be things that are last to recover. They may not. And I think it's critically important that organizations, some part of the organization, need to transition from emergency response to some sort of evaluation of how do I respond to my products, my services, how is the market changing really within the next 30 to 60 days. And that's to help chart a clear path through adoption in the new world. Now, that's critically important because at the end of the day, we also know that the annual budget process will continue as it normally does. Now, that may change. And so as you look at cost optimization activities and other types of initiatives, investments that are unplanned or that were not planned as you started this year's kind of budget cycle, how do you incorporate those things that are not only going to drive out costs within your business to allow you to really adapt to the new cost optimization and cost constraints and consumer spending and economic constraints in the economy, but most importantly, how do you position yourself for growth? We know in all downturns, there's companies that come out of this with tremendous brand value because they've supported their community, and they've come out of there with great market fundamentals to be able to respond to this. The question every company needs to really assess at this point is, am I going to be the one that just waits and sees how this pans out? Or am I going to be proactive to respond and to learn about this new environment and ultimately put us in position so that when we do emerge from this, we have a safer world, we have a better community, and ultimately we can still deliver great products and services to our customers and our constituents. And that, my friends, concludes today's presentation. Again, if there are any final questions or comments, again, here's our contact information for Bill and myself that you can reach out to us and have any questions about this as well. And then we'll hold it open. There's one question, and if there's, we'll start taking questions as we move forward. Let me get here. This is
one question is, will the Centers for Disease Control and or the World Health Organization endorse or approve wellness reporting models and devices? I think that's quite an interesting question. Clearly, with all of the controversy around the accuracy of infrared temperature tests, there is going to be a need to assess and perhaps even certify the accuracy of devices and procedures going forward. I think that would fall under the authority of Health and Human Services. To date, the government has placed great credibility on the opinion of the CDC. So it remains to be seen what process and what criteria will be in place going forward, but it will be, I think, necessary as we struggle a bit to find reliable testing that will ensure that we catch these things and contain the spread. I also wanted to add one other thing to the comments so far. One of the sort of side effects of all of this for human resources people will be managing employee relations going forward. Undoubtedly, there will be resistance to some of these measures. So HR people need to be prepared to handle that with some strategy to maintain positive employee relations through all of this.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bill. We've got other questions that are coming in right now. We're going to take them as they came in. So the first one is about what return to work may look like, and think about the precautions that we're taking at our homes and organizations might want to mitigate. That's a great question. We have been proposing, and we've been doing some work on really disinfectant protocols and procedures that are being applied. This includes things like hydrogen peroxide and other types of solutions, as well as UV light that can be leveraged for this. And thinking about what is a disinfected workplace and this type of environment, how does that disinfection process actually occur? I think those are going to be some of the precautions that we see moving forward. There's a lot of innovation that's obviously happening there. One of the things I'll just cover quickly, and then again, we want to kind of get into this more in another conversation, is these disinfectant protocols, both UV light as well as hydrogen peroxide and some other types of solutions. The actual OSHA as well as FDA have several approved procedures that defeat different types of viruses. This is a well understood and very available sets of solutions through janitorial services today. There is still some basic research. We talked to a UV provider who was getting a sample of COVID-19 to actually validate the amount of time it had to be exposed to UV light to, in fact, destroy the virus. Their essential premise was 5 minutes. So we'll kind of move on to the next questions. Yeah, the privacy, the same kind of question around privacy. These are going to be probably one of the biggest components to this. I think we, in the interim, may respond very quickly to being able to report our condition, our wellness. I think as time goes on, there will be a question of, do we really want to do that? There will be people that fall into a trusted traveler model, if you will. Just like today, we have a lot of people who sign up to go through that expedited line when they travel, and then we have the people who are not traveling frequent enough. I think that's going to be a real kind of evolving area that we're going to see. And I think that there's going to be, initially, we would say there's going to probably be some overreach. Just right now, we're seeing a lot of severe controls being put in place. I mean, we're all at home. Some of us haven't left our house in 3-4 weeks at this point. Some have gone out very sparingly. That is an extreme control. As we try to find that balance between those extreme mitigation approaches and others, that's going to be a moving line. And I don't think there's a clear answer.
Ty, I have a couple of comments to add to that. As Stacy asked a very insightful question here. So one of the considerations will be whether we apply the health testing to everyone at a given company, for example, or do we test people based upon some other priority or criteria, such that some will be tested and some will not. Generally speaking, the courts don't favor anything that smacks of profiling. So that will be one concern clearly for litigation. I think another concern will be what criteria will be in place, what valid criteria will be in place to disqualify someone from coming into the workplace that day or for an extended period of time. So those are things that have yet to be defined by the courts. And I think litigation is going to be inevitable. We can't predict what everyone will raise as a concern And so there's likely to be a significant court intervention going forward. And then thirdly, there is a consideration of the public interest. So every time a major crisis occurs, let's say 9/11 in this current pandemic, there clearly is an erosion of privacy and security expectations that is being done presumably for the greater good. So that line keeps moving. And there'll be considerable debate about how far the line should move and what are people going to be giving up in terms of privacy and security expectations. Will that be temporary? Will it be permanent as we move forward? So.
The last question is around OSHA's role in this from a right to work perspective. And I think the short answer is did a little bit of preliminary research on what OSHA is saying. I think at this point we have so many emerging state regulations and guidelines from the CDC, the FDA, NIH, other kind of health and human services. We're going to get to that point. But I do believe that OSHA, as well as for those that are in union organizations, this is going to become employee labor relations law. I mean, this is going to have to be codified into teachers' union contracts, other types of contracts in the rail and transportation areas and union operations. These are going to be as well. But we do see that OSHA, in conjunction with the guidance that's finally solidified with FDA, CDC, NIH, et cetera, HHS, all of these kind of supporting agencies that are there are going to have to get coordinated. Best expectation would be that some of that will be codified initially, minus legal challenges, as we get through flattening the curve, if you will, hopefully this summer. And then I think, again, we're going to have to go through another round of not only COVID-19 potential hotspots, but ultimately another round of guidance, legal challenges, so that hopefully by we get into the spring a year from now, that we have some more definitive guidelines, some more vetted in the courts approaches to how we in fact do this. And so that is probably all. That's 3 questions that we received from everybody on the line. We want to thank everybody who hung in there with us, and hopefully you got value from this call today. Again, there are multiple ripples that are going to be facing all of us in our organization. Again, we want to salute those healthcare workers, those people that are doing the garbage pickup at our house, those people that quite honestly, and we all probably don't spend enough time thinking, they're the ones that have kept everything going in the middle of all of us trying to figure this out. And Tech Titans will continue to look at and serve the community. So again, if you have questions, comments, let us be a sounding board for how you want to understand information, how we can provide resources, and ultimately how we can come together even more as a community and in the tech space to create solutions and approaches that help us to move forward out of this time of crisis and back to a time of better community, better society, better industry within North Texas. Thank you so much. And again, if you have questions, please send us an email, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon. Thank you.